Why not go to the a bit of history part?
Right.
It's a bit of history that Alan Turing would be this month, June, 101 years. So why not do a one-on-one on Alan Turing in a sense,
Mm.
with that binary thing part there. And I'll start ask you, and you have a bit of history with Alan Turing, not that you've known Alan
No,
Turing,
no.
but you have a bit of history there. But before we go to your history with Alan Turing, he a mathematical genius that made contributions to what is now called modern computing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I go around calling many people geniuses, so I'm not going to say that I think he was a genius, but he was a very, very, very able mathematician. Let's put it that way. Um, he's probably most popularly well known for having worked on code breaking at Bletchley Park, in particular on taking work that the Polish code breakers had done on breaking Enigma, because they had quite a lot of success with Enigma in before the Second World War, and they built a machine which they called the bomb. And then Turing worked on a British version of that, extended it with others for the slightly more complex versions of the Enigma that the Nazi Germany started using. He also worked on some other stuff. One of the things I think is quite interesting is he worked on a lot around statistical methods applied to code breaking. So a lot of code breaking stuff he's very well known for. But prior to the war, one of the reasons why he ended up at Bletchley Park was he's a mathematician at Cambridge, and he worked on a very sort of theoretical piece of mathematics. So within mathematics, there were some questions that came up at the sort of beginning of the 20th century about to what extent could mathematics be made systematic? And you know, there were sort of these. Well, it's a guy called David Hilbert, a very famous mathematician who laid out this long set of things about. It was around like unsolved problems in mathematics, and some of those were around some obscure things in mathematics, but others were. There were questions actually about like, was mathematics complete? Were you going to be able to get to somewhere where you could have a set of axioms that were completely consistent, and you could sort of, if you like, do all of mathematics within that. And a guy called Kurt Gödel came along and said, no, actually, that's not the case. That if no matter what system you define, there's always some problems in mathematics going to be like outside of that system that won't be provable within it, which was quite shocking. And there was a related thing, which was to do with computability, which is like, could you have some systematic way of doing something? And that problem is something that the Turing worked on. And the thing is, when he worked on that problem, he had to define what something systematic was, and that systematic thing was some sort of machine. And if you go all the way back to Leibniz, he had thought about mechanical calculating machines. And so in Hilbert, when he said, this problem of like sort of what we think about of as computability now, a bunch of people worked on this, trying to figure out whether there was some like systematic way of proving things in mathematics using formal languages and stuff like that. And in a little bit of a similar way to Gödel did the incompleteness theorem, Turing showed that, there were always going to be algorithms which were what was called undecidable. We wouldn't know whether they would terminate or not, for example, whether the program would ever stop. Bunch of other people worked on similar stuff, a guy called Alonzo Church, and also a guy called Post. We sometimes say things are Turing complete, which means they can compute all the things that computers can compute. We sometimes say Church Turing compute. Sometimes we say Church Post Turing complete. There's these sort of awkward things. But in the paper on the Entscheidungs problem, Turing invents this machine. He calls it an A machine. It's this thing with a tape that goes through it. They can have symbols on it. And we call that a Turing machine now, and it's fundamentally used as an idea, computing basis for computing. And finally, he got interested in artificial intelligence and started thinking about what it would mean for a machine to think, and a bunch of other stuff. It's very wide-ranging mathematics. He's particularly interested also in why do animals have the patterns on their skin that they have? Like, think about a Frisian cow, the black and white. Like, how does that develop? Or spots on a leopard, or
It,
patterns on a frog. And he looked at that
it's
from a mathematical perspective. So there's like many.
biology looked at the mathematical perspective. That's quite
Yes, completely.
something.
Yes.
And
Lots and lots of stuff. Yeah. So he was a mathematician, very well known, and of course he killed himself, cyanide poisoning, in the 50s because he was homosexual and he had been convicted of being homosexual. So that's kind of his story in the very short version of it.
Of course. And you had a role, in a sense, a few years ago, more than 10 years ago now,
It's
I
a
think.
long time ago now.
In terms of doing a petition related to this, right?
I tell you what I thought. Not the pardon. Wasn't involved in the pardon. So I thought that although Turing was well known among mathematicians and computer scientists, I thought that it would be, if Britain apologized for the treatment of him and by extension other gay men, two things would happen. One is people would hear about Turing, and by having spoken about this sad situation, we would then sort of move on from it and talk about all the other things he did. And so that was in 2009. What became a blog post became a petition, which actually became an apology by the British government. So
Gordon Brown, here it is.
Gordon Brown was Prime Minister at the time. Yes, absolutely.
And but in a sense, it was also to emphasize his role in terms of computing.
No, I thought so, because I thought that I always felt that he didn't get talked about much in public sense because there was this very sad end to his life. And as a British person, we're kind of bad at speaking about things. We don't like to talk about uncomfortable subjects. So I was like, well, if we talk about the uncomfortable subject one time, everybody, then it will help us move on and we'll be able to speak about everything else he did with a sort of clear head. And so that was the idea of the apology. And some other people extended that into a pardon. And I think the big thing for me was after the apology, the government under David Cameron actually introduced a law which it got rid of all of the convictions that gay men had had in the UK, because there were men alive convicted under these laws who were a criminal conviction, which was quite extraordinary. And so now there's it says on here the Alan Turing law, which actually in the end pardoned all of the men who had had convictions for being homosexual.
And there's also the Turing Award that premiates
the Turing Award is ancient. You see, this Turing Award is a good example of how the ACM had the Turing Award since the 60s.
Exactly, 66.
And because within the computer science community, Turing was very, very well known as one of the pioneers. And we've been giving that award for a long time. And my goal with the petition was really to make sure that everyone else realized that here was somebody exceedingly bright who had contributed in a number of areas, and not just the Second World War.
And it became like a Nobel Prize for AI in a sense,
I guess.
And recently there's been discussions about the future role of AI with Jan LeCun, one of
Jeff Hinton as well.
And Joshua Benju.
Certainly, the Turing Award winners are an interesting group of people.
Absolutely. And that was a bit of history there about Alan Turing, someone you should know. There's a movie that came out at the time you were doing that request, that petition.